after the hour here. Still getting a few more people rolling in now as we get after the hour, but that's fine. Once again, welcome to everyone across the north central part of the U.S. I sit in Fort Collins today. It's a lovely clear day here, kind of warm, but lack of humidity. We have a number of different issues going on with drought and flood and fire and all kinds of other pestilence. So well, let's go ahead and get started with our monthly webinar. Martha Shulsky, the state climatologist and associate professor at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, is our presenter. So Martha, go ahead and take it away. Again, we will encourage people to, we will do questions at the end. As you think of questions along the way, please go ahead and type them in, and we will take care of them at the end the best we can. Go ahead, Martha.
Great, thanks very much, Dennis. So as Dennis alluded to, there's quite a bit to talk about here, and what you're seeing in the background in this image was brought to us by the state climatologist from Missouri. There's some dryness issues going on there, which we'll talk about later. So that's what you see here. It's the Hamilton City Reservoir, which is east of St. Joe, Missouri, so kind of north central Missouri. So just some general information. This is a collaborative effort among a number of different groups. NOAA and the National Centers for Environmental Information, American Association of State Climatologists. We get a lot of great reports from those in the different states and the extension agents that they work with. The Midwestern and High Plains Regional Climate Centers provide a lot of data and information. NOAA's Climate Prediction Center, you'll notice some products from there, as well as the National Drought Mitigation Center. For those of you interested, next month, these are obviously a monthly occurrence, so the third Thursday of the month. Next one will be August 16th, that should be 2018, not 2017, I apologize for that. And you can sign up and get an email reminder for future webinars at the link below on drought.gov. And these are recorded, and you can get YouTube recordings of this, as well as PDFs of these at the High Plains Regional Climate Center and Midwestern Regional Climate Center website. And as Dennis mentioned, we are open for questions at the end of my slideshow here. So what we're going to be talking about today, I'll give a little perspective since we've had half of 2018 go by. We'll look at the year-to-date conditions, look at June conditions, how we ranked globally and in the US and statewide. We'll look at more recently, the last 30 days, discuss the many impacts that are going on around the region that are quite varied. Look at El Nino, since we've entered an El Nino watch, and then look at some climate outlooks, both short term and longer term, and then again have time for questions at the end. So 2018 year to date, it was fourth warmest globally since 1880. So for the first 6 months of the year, that's how globally we've stacked up. You'll note for the north central region, we're in the white category, which is near average, which is not necessarily reflective of what took place in the first half of the year. That's an average, but there's a lot of ups and downs going on within that time frame. If you look to the kind of southern half of the US, as well as the northeast and west coast, we had above to much above average temperatures to even record warmest for a few states in the region. And of note for the north central region, it was fourth warmest for Colorado year-to-date temperature. If we look at precipitation, this is again January through June 2018 precipitation ranking statewide. So we had kind of the swath of wetness in kind of the central US and the mid-Atlantic, where there were some states that were top 5 or top 10 wettest, anyway, for states like Ohio. And you can see where there's been some dryness issues year to date. So Kansas in the below average category, and Colorado ranks as 11th driest, again in the year to date category there. Can go to a finer scale here and look at June in particular. So it was the 5th warmest June globally. And this is how the US temperatures ranked. So much of the US and pretty much all of the region of interest that we're talking about today was in the above to much above category. It was top 10 warmest for several states. We've got Colorado, for our region in particular, that ranked the warmest. or third warmest overall, with Kansas, Missouri, Iowa, North Dakota all ranked pretty highly there. And we're hearing reports of high minimum temperatures as well. I'm not showing the ranking for minimum temperatures, but several states did have the highest average nighttime low temperatures for the month of June. And if we look at the same time frame for precipitation, we'll see that it was generally wet in the north, kind of in the above average category to much above average, much above for Iowa, Indiana, and Kentucky. And notice a few states that I'll be calling out kind of later in the webinar is Michigan, where it was in the near average category here, and I'll talk about later why that's important. Missouri and Kansas in the near average category, and Colorado in the below average category. So that's how the June precipitation rankings played out. So let's look at just the last 30 days. So this is going back to middle of June to middle of July. So we zoom in on the north central region. These is a temperature departure from normal, this graphic here from the High Plains Regional Climate Center. And for much of the region as a whole, we were in the 2 to 4 degrees above normal category. You can see the strongest warmth departures from normal were in the north central and the Dakotas, northern Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, and then in eastern Kansas and Missouri, as well as portions of Colorado. We did have some cool pockets kind of in the western part of the region, parts of South Dakota, Nebraska, and into Wyoming and Montana. And I will just call out this area here. The next graphic we're going to look at is precipitation, where it's been pretty wet in this area over the last 30 days. So you can just kind of get an indication of the temperature departures from normal that go along with that increased wetness. So in terms of precipitation, there's certainly been some winners and losers around the region, as it typically is with precipitation. Significant wetness, which I will talk about some impacts later in southeastern South Dakota, central and northeast Nebraska, northern half of Iowa, and Iowa we certainly see kind of a split in what's going on in the northwest part versus the southeast part of Iowa, and wet for the southern portion of Minnesota. So in this particular region, we've, over the last 30 days, they've received upwards of 10 to 14 inches of precipitation. So in the lower left of the view there, we've got a departure from normal precipitation for that given 30-day time period. So you can see pretty significant departures from normal. And some other areas to call out that have been dry is Missouri, and we've seen a reflection of that in the enhancement of the U.S. Drought Monitor. Michigan has been dry. That's an issue that we're concerned about, kind of this dryness that's quickly coming on. And then Colorado as well has not received a lot of precipitation in the last 30 days, and a bit less than normal. All right, and if I'll step back just a bit and talk about the previous 6 months, and you can really see the strong gradient kind of in the central portion of the region where we've got quite a bit of wetness. So this is a year to date, or almost year to date, I should say, middle of January to middle of July, and this really strong gradient in terms of wetness in the north part of that highlighted region there, and then significant dryness there in the south. So this will certainly come into play when we talk about impacts, and again reflected in the U.S. Drought Monitor. All right, so the current drought monitor for the NWS Central region, so this came out this morning, and it's valid as of Tuesday. So you can see the areas of color there. So we've got the areas of most concern here is Missouri, much of Missouri, particularly north central areas of Missouri, eastern portions of Kansas. We had some D4 or exceptional drought enter there in eastern Kansas. Colorado, obviously still dealing with dryness issues, particularly in the south and the southwest. And some areas also that have cropped up there in Michigan, we've got some dryness, abnormal dryness, and then moderate drought, D1 there in portions of Michigan. So for the region as a whole, 15% is in drought, so a D1 to D4 category, and 13% is abnormally dry. And the most extreme drought conditions, the D4 category, that are exceptional drought, I should say, that's generally confined to the southern areas of the central region. So let's look at changes in the Drought Monitor. So if you joined us or viewed the last webinar, this is how conditions have changed in 1 month. And I'll just highlight a few areas of concern here. You can see portions of Missouri and eastern Kansas have gotten worse. We've seen 1 to 2 and even 3 class degradation in these areas. They just have not received the rainfall that other areas have. If we go to Michigan there, a good majority of the state there has seen a 1 or 2 class degradation in terms of drought conditions. And then in Colorado and southern Wyoming as well, seeing that dryness kind of creep in. But the central portion of the region here has benefited with some timely rains, and you can see 1 to 2 to even 3 class improvement in drought categories. So that's how the dryness conditions have either gotten worse or gotten better over the last month. So relatedly, if we look at soil water conditions, this is modeled data, and we're looking at the past weeks. The top 1 meter or 3 feet of soil moisture, and what percentile ranking is this compared to historical conditions. And obviously the areas that kind of stand out is Missouri and eastern Kansas, where we're in the 10 to even 5 to less than 5% soil moisture conditions here. You see the areas of Michigan there that we're in the very low percentiles there in terms of soil moisture availability, as well as areas of Colorado. So those are kind of the areas of concern where we've seen that the degradation in drought conditions over the past weeks and month. And you can see the wetness as well. So kind of north central Nebraska, and then the area of northwest Iowa, southwest Minnesota, and southeast South Dakota, where that's been quite wet in those areas, as well as if you go further west into Wyoming and Montana. All right, so we'll look at stream flow conditions. So rather than a daily, this is the 7-day average stream flow. So we're looking at obviously a number of different precipitation events kind of averaging out to this. And again, you can see, as you would expect, a pattern of much above normal stream flow conditions, again, for that area that's been wet and has received quite a bit of precipitation, and even more or less yesterday, actually, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. But again, the area of northern Nebraska, northwest Iowa, southeastern South Dakota, and Minnesota, some high stream flow conditions, portions of the Black Hills, high stream flows, and you see a lot of green in certain areas, so that's kind of in the normal range. And then you do see some below normal and much below normal, as you would expect, in central Missouri, especially north central Missouri and eastern Kansas, portions of Michigan. We're seeing some much below normal stream flow conditions, again, for that 7-day average. And then for Colorado as well. So much of the state is in the kind of the 10th percentile. They are much below normal stream flow conditions. All right, so we'll get into some of the impacts. There's quite a bit to talk about here. So just kind of overviewing some highlights is generally for the entire region, it was a late start. We had a pretty cold April, so a late start to the growing season. It was cold conditions, it was wet, so getting to the field was generally problematic. but progression occurred rapidly. And so the growing degree days caught up and are now above normal. We're hearing reports of roughly 20 to 30% ahead of normal for about this time of year. So a slow start, but conditions, things have grown quite rapidly due to the warmer than normal temperatures. There was some hail damage to crops, mostly corn crops around the region, which I'll talk about. Fires going on in Colorado. So we talked about the warmth and the dryness. So just of note, the state's third largest fire, which is a human-caused wildfire, the Spring Creek fire, it's mostly contained now, but that's a significant thing that's going on there in Colorado. Dryness has intensified in Missouri. I'll show some examples of some crop impacts, reports that we're getting there. We've had some localized heavy precipitation events with flooding in various states. And then finally, Missouri River, the third highest runoff in recorded history. So I'll go around to a few of the states here. So we'll start in the West, and there's kind of a really touching image that you see there, this family looking out and at this massive fire that's taking place. So the Spring Creek fire, that's in south central Colorado, again, third largest fire in history. It's burned more than 108,000 acres, and as of a few days ago, it was 90% contained. So that's the good news. The bad news is it was something that developed quite rapidly and destroyed quite a few homes. I wasn't able to get a good handle on the exact number, but there's been quite a bit of devastation associated with that fire. There's one of the other bigger fires going on is called the 416 fire. That's in southwest portion of the state. About 54,000 acres have burned so far, and that one is 50% contained. There's a concern, obviously, in the burn scars when if it's subject to heavy precipitation events, that perhaps mudslides will happen. So that's a concern as kind of the monsoon rains kind of kick in here for this area. Okay, some more impacts around the region. So here I'm going to talk about South Dakota and Nebraska here together. There's kind of some similar things going on across the state. So, and this is a theme that could really be said for areas all across the region, but late planting, again, due to the cold and wet conditions, but rapid crop growth due to above normal temperatures. I know we were getting some calls in Nebraska, some folks that were concerned that we're not early in the season, we weren't getting the growing degree days and that we were not going to be off to a good start, but we've really jumped up in those growing degree day values there. In the western portions of South Dakota and Nebraska, the pastures are quite green, lots of wildflowers. The landscape really looks beautiful out there. Stock ponds are full, lots of rain in that area. So it looks quite nice for this time of year, for mid-July. We're not without extreme events in this area. We had some hail reports with crop damages. So here's an image from, I believe it's a MODIS image, and you can see more than 200 or 250 miles or so hail scar from a June 28th event, and then the long one that goes kind of east to west, and then another hail scar as well. So it's pretty widespread damage actually for a hail event. And we've got another image here for hail damaged corn crop. This one's near Holdridge, Nebraska, which is kind of south central portion of the state. So there was a hail event there a few weeks ago, and so here's just after the hailstorm actually. So you can see evidence there, and you can see from the hailstone size, they weren't particularly large, but it lasted a long enough amount of time that you can see these stalks are basically just look like they're cut in half essentially. And I did want to note the South Dakota State Climatologist actually drew my attention to the flooding that they've been experiencing in eastern South Dakota and the Brookings area. And in fact, Yesterday, there was a report of 8.87 inches by a CocoRa's observer. So that's the Citizen Science Network, Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network. There's quite a few observations all around the country, but a one-day precip total of 8.87 inches. And we'll see if that might set a new record for one-day precipitation total for South Dakota. So South Dakota's been experiencing some flood issues along some rivers. Minnesota has as well. So we heard reports from the state climatology office there, just various flooding reports. And so here I'm showing a picture in the lower left from one. It's the Cottonwood River near Lamberton, kind of southern portion of Minnesota, that's following a July 3rd heavy rain event. So you can see the road covered there. Lake Mille Lacs, which is kind of north central Minnesota, a little bit north. It rose of half a foot in one day due to about a 7-inch rain event. So some really significant heavy precipitation events for portions of the central U.S. In addition, growing degree days are also above normal in this area, and some pretty good crop reports as well that we're hearing out of Minnesota. If we go south to Iowa again, so this is kind of a tale of two Iowas and this really strong precipitation and moisture gradient here. So wet in the northwest, dry in the southeast. Some of the dryness in the southeastern portion of the state has been going on for long term. It's not just come up in the past few months, but it's been going on for more than a year or so. There was so the image that you see in the lower right is a pasture there. You can see what the pasture looks like, and these cattle that are kind of hovered around this tree here to get some shade. There's been some flooding as well, so probably most significantly in central Iowa. There's an image there from the Des Moines Register, so quite a bit of significant flooding taking place there in central Iowa and northwest Iowa as well. All right, so on the beginning, the first slide there, I showed an image at the Hamilton City Reservoir there in kind of north central Missouri. And so here we're just showing a few more pictures around the state. So this is Unionville, which is kind of extreme northern Missouri, not too far from Iowa there. These are courtesy of the state climatologists there in Missouri. So you can see the cornfields there and just how the leaves look and rolled and sticking straight up. And I heard somebody refer to this as pineapple corn, I think. So you can see what kind of impact the crops are having there. And then there's a pasture field as well. So these were taken just a few days ago, July 13th, again in extreme northern Missouri. And I apologize, there's a typo. It's the third driest year to date in a century for Unionville. So lots of dryness issues going on, and kind of this somewhat rapid deterioration here of conditions in Missouri. All right, so we'll go a little bit east and north. And what's interesting is in Michigan, we've got a few different things going on that are you wouldn't necessarily relate them together. So generally high lake levels. I'm thinking of the Great Lakes. We're hearing of 1.5 feet to up to 22 inches to 2 feet above average water levels, and associated shoreline damage. So for homes that are located along the shore of some of the lakes with the high water levels, and if any storm does come through, then some erosion and associated storm damage with that. So high lake levels, however, we've got a relatively quick deterioration of dryness conditions combined with above normal temperatures. We're hearing that burn bans are in effect, particularly for southern Michigan, and the crops that are experiencing issues are more with late planted crops and more shallow rooting depths, and so not able to go down and get deeper soil moisture reserves. And so most of the issues seen right now with crops are with those that were late in getting planted. In Ohio, so similar to kind of southern Michigan, in Ohio, conditions deteriorating in northwestern part of the state with a drying trend that's has been come along fairly quickly. There's so far and overall, there's not too many agricultural impacts, but again, as in Michigan, the late planted crops are the ones that are seeing stress. So for these two couple states in particular, if we get persistence of above normal temperatures and below normal precipitation, then these would certainly be areas to watch in terms of continued crop stress. Okay, so we'll switch to some crop conditions here. So we'll first look at wheat harvest. So the winter wheat, and this is percent harvested, is in the top number, and then the difference from last week is in the bottom number. And so for just highlight a few of the states here, Colorado and Ohio is in there in 80 to 87% harvested. Missouri 100% harvested. Much of the region are in the 90 to 100% harvested. Nebraska's at 62, Michigan's at 38, and the coloring there is the coloring based on the change since last week. And so the darker the color, the more the change. So Colorado and Ohio in particular, you can see a lot of harvesting was going on over the past week. So nationally, 74% harvested and a little bit above the most recent 5-year average. So topsoil moisture. So as you would expect, the areas of concern here, Missouri, Michigan, Colorado, this is the topsoil moisture that is in the percent of short to very short. So the higher the number, the worse the conditions, or the drier the topsoil moisture is. And then so the top number is in the actual percentage on a statewide basis, and then the bottom number is a change from last week. What's the percentage change? So you can see Michigan has degraded. The conditions there have degraded about 20% since last week. So 78% of the state is in that short to very short in terms of topsoil moisture. Missouri is in about the same boat, 77% the state with soil moisture deficits. You can see the areas that you would expect to be in pretty decent shape is Minnesota, and so Iowa, Nebraska, the Dakotas are all less than 25% of the state is in the short to very short category. Okay, so next few slides we'll look at corn conditions and soybean condition. So the top number here is the percent of the crop throughout the state that is rated in the good to excellent category. And then the bottom is the percent change from last week. So nationwide, we've got, or in the highlighted states there, the percent of corn that's in the good to excellent category is 72%. It's fairly good across the region. The one that stands out here would be Kansas. That's for only half of the corn crop is rated good to excellent category. But some of the other states here, it's 70% or higher, generally above the region. Michigan is another one where only about half the state, the corn crop for the state of Michigan is in the good to excellent category. So the same type of graphic for soybean. So we're looking at 75% in Minnesota, Iowa, 73% in Illinois, 70% in Ohio, where we do see it 50% or less. Missouri, as we would expect, I should have mentioned that for the corn, for the previous graphic, that was also not a high percentage, was in the good to excellent category for corn, as you would expect, given how much of the state is in experiencing dryness conditions. Soybean conditions for Kansas, 45% in the good to excellent category. Again, in the lower number there, you can see the change from last week. Right, so for the last section here, we'll get into the climate outlooks. We'll do short term, look at El Nino, since we have entered an El Nino watch, look at drought outlook for the upcoming season, and look at kind of the rest of summer and fall, a little bit into winter conditions. So this is a graphic that's typically shown on these webinars. So this is the quantitative precipitation forecast. So how much rain do we expect to get over the US for the next 7 days here? And so I've kind of highlighted in the black box there, kind of the region of interest here that we're focusing on in this webinar. And so looking like Colorado, possibly some relief of a few inches there. Again, if this forecast verifies. Other areas kind of wetness here. Ohio could benefit from some rain here in the next week. Michigan as well, particularly southern Michigan. Missouri and eastern Kansas. So that's obviously an area of concern here for drought conditions. And they're looks like they're largely missing out for this area. Eastern Kansas only looking like 1/10 of an inch or so not much precipitation in the forecast. Again, if this verifies over the next 7 days. And then into Missouri, less than 1/4 to 1/2 inch of precip. So, and that extends into southern Iowa as well. So in the short term, we'll see if this verifies, and this is valid this Thursday through next Thursday, July 26th. Okay, so we'll look out further. So July 26th to August 1st. So the Climate Prediction Center 8 to 14 day outlooks are, you see a lot of blue for this region here, unless you're in Colorado there, and it's kind of split in terms of temperature probabilities. But for the majority of the north central region, the probabilities of below normal temperatures, that's kind of the highest category there, where it's 40% or more higher probability, with kind of a bullseye in Minnesota, Iowa, northeast Nebraska, and eastern South Dakota. And then warmth, kind of continued warmth for the western third of the US and Alaska as well. And if we look at precipitation patterns here, hopefully some wetness here to the south, kind of covering some areas that have missed out on some recent rainfall. So from kind of Nebraska and southward, this increased chance for wetter than normal conditions for this 8 to 14 day period, and an increased chance for dryness kind of for the north central portion of this region and western as well. One thing I should point out here is kind of Colorado and the Intermountain West, that's kind of a dividing line here. So it could have kind of a split between increased chance for warmth and dryness in the west, and then cool and wetter in the east. Okay, so we have entered, NOAA has put out an El Nino watch, and this is a probabilistic El Nino forecast, and it's going 3-month time intervals, starting at the June, July, August time period. This came out in early July. I believe this was last week that this forecast came out. And what you're looking at is what are the chances for El Nino, neutral, and La Nina, each of those different categories. And we are seeing some warmth in the equatorial Pacific, especially kind of deeper in the ocean, which is likely to make its way to the surface, and it's looking like result in an El Nino event. And so chances for El Nino, the red bars there, by late summer and into the fall, that has the highest chances of an El Nino occurring, starting in about late summer and early fall. So that's the most likely scenario by fall time. So I'll get a little bit more into some of the outlooks here. So for August, so these outlooks, they came out this morning from the Climate Prediction Center, and calling for increased chance for above normal temperatures for much of the country. There's a kind of a donut here in the north central US, kind of central Nebraska and northward, where they're calling for equal chances. So not a lot of guidance in terms of temperature projection for August. And on the right-hand side, if we look at precipitation, we'll see kind of increased chance for wetness in the southwestern portion of this region. So possibly some relief for Colorado. However, going further east, there's this blob of increased chance for below normal precipitation in impacting Kansas and Missouri. So the combination of increased chance for warmer than normal along with drier than normal is not what we wanted to see for Kansas and for Missouri. Okay, if we continue on into the August, September, October outlook, so kind of end of summer. So the increased chance for warmer than normal temperatures, you still see that remaining and kind of shifting northward a bit. So for much of the country, that's the highest probability, highest category of above normal temperatures for that 3-month time frame. And similarly, if we look kind of continuing this trend for August, in the August, September, October outlook, again, we're seeing increased chance for below normal precipitation kind of in Kansas, Missouri area. And however, in the West, good thing, because we've got some significant drought issues going on in the Southwest as well. So hopefully this might result in some relief and some scaling back of drought conditions as we look into the fall. Okay, so the drought outlook that was also released this morning. So here, as you might expect, given what the outlooks are, and this is for the time period middle of July through the end of October, on the kind of the southern portion of this north central region, we're looking at persistence, where we have drought conditions, and development where perhaps there currently is not drought, but given the combination of that increased chance for warmth as well as dryness, that's likely what's driving kind of the seasonal drought outlook. The good thing there in the Southwest, it looks like for Colorado, drought remains but improves for a portion of the state, or even drought removal. They're kind of in the northern fringe of the Colorado drought conditions. So we could be seeing kind of this east-west gradient here in terms of precipitation conditions as well as drought conditions. So just going out a little bit further, here is the October, November, December time frame. So with the El Nino conditions, the most likely scenario for this time frame, we're seeing the kind of this wetness enhancement, increased chance for wetter than normal conditions along the southern U.S. that extends up into southeast Wyoming and into Nebraska. For the remainder of the region here, equal chances of above near normal and below normal precipitation. And for much of the country, we're in the increased probability of above normal temperatures. So these are what the most recent outlooks are for the October, November, December timeframe. Okay, just to summarize kind of the significant issues that are going on right now. It was a cold and late start to the growing season for most all areas across the region. People were late getting into the fields. However, it's like a flip was switched in May. We went from blizzards and cold and winter right into summer. So we had some significant warmth starting in May that led to very rapid crop growth and actually putting progress ahead of schedule by around a few weeks. In terms of precipitation, it's been kind of spotty and localized with some heavy rain events and flooding kind of here and there across the region, kind of a mixed bag, if you will, of precipitation. Some winners and losers, certainly. July ends with an enhanced likelihood for cooler than normal across the region. So that 8 to 14 day outlook that I showed had this swath of blue across the region. So increased chance for cooler than normal for this time of year. And along with that, drier than normal in the north and wetter than normal in the south. So that's kind of the outlook for the remainder of July. And hopeful for some monsoon relief, perhaps in Colorado to help alleviate some of those drought conditions, maybe not eliminate it completely, but hopefully try and make up some of those deficits, but not so lucky further east in Missouri and portions of eastern Kansas. All right, so just some information on all the partners. Again, thanks to everybody who contributed. This is a team effort in gathering all this information. And so very appreciative of all the reports coming in from the state climate offices, regional climate centers, Drought Mitigation Center, all the different resources that come together for these presentations. So that concludes the slideshow here, and we'd be happy to pause for any questions that you all might have.
Great. Thank you very much, Martha. I greatly appreciate that. Summary of, again, a lot of information and a lot of different things going on, even sometimes in close proximity to each other. So, Brian, do you have any questions queued up there that we need to touch on?
Yes, Dennis and Martha, I have just a handful of questions. First of all, folks early on the call wanted to know where they could see the links to these presentations. So if at all possible, while we're taking questions, if you can leave it on this slide. Yes, thank you, Martha. The next question came from Bryce. He was asking, or he was saying that just as an observation, in terms of northern Missouri's D3 status on the Drought Monitor, that he had noted that perhaps this was the first time since 2012 that they had seen the drought classification in that area. I believe that to be correct. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, interesting.
Go ahead, Martha.
I believe Pat Ganan's on vacation, so I don't know if he's here. That's not a statistic that I have readily available. I don't know if you're aware of that, Dennis, or can confirm or have any comments on that.
Yeah, not off the top of my head. I bet I would agree that I think that is probably the case, but you know, that is available on the U.S. Drought Monitor website. You can pick out locations, and they will show when you can either go back and look at maps, or they show categorizations of where they have been over time. That's distinctly possible and very legitimate, given the information that we've seen on the way of crops and the way of water that Martha talked about and have come up via other places too.
Okay, very good. Next question. There was a question from Benjamin asking about the soil moisture or soil water conditions and how are they modeled. And specifically, they were looking at NCEP products with soil moisture percentiles.
I'll go ahead and take that one, Martha. Yeah, there are several different models. And Martha, I think did you show an individual one or kind of the overall one? I can't remember which one.
That was an ensemble average, if I remember correctly.
Okay, right. There are several different land surface process models that try to model interactions at that land surface between atmosphere, crop conditions, withdrawal, and infiltration from the soils. I can't give you too many details about the model, but when we're saying an ensemble here, there's a bunch of these different models that are run, and it's trying to get at what is the combination of these models saying. So one thing I did want to point out, just to make sure everybody understood that the map was percentiles. So it's a ranking scale. It's not percent soil moisture. Just wanted to make sure everybody was clear on that it's a ranking scale. So it still gives you an indication that it's really low, but it is a ranking scale.
I think that's very helpful. Thank you. Moving on, we had a question about the drought stress that's seen in Missouri and Texas, and comments on whether the corn can recover at this stage.
Okay, I'll go ahead and take that one too. Corn that has been stressed, by the time it's reached tasseling, there has been damage done. And it depends on how severe the damage is. Corn that is brown already, there's almost nothing to that. If corn has been stressed, but these cooler temperatures do occur, which are expected to happen over parts of the area, there is a chance for for some filling of the grain, better filling of the grain to occur, so they could recover a little bit. But corn is very much influenced by what happens during this reproductive period, the tasseling period, and the grain fill soon afterwards. Soybeans have an ability to flux over time and to adapt a bit, so that even if even as it's suffering through now in places, if you get some August rainfalls and some cooler temperatures, they have an ability to recover. So corn is much more influenced by what's happened so far.
Okay, thank you. We had another question from Theo asking, what are the implications from El Nino and the scenario with the beginning coming on this fall? What are the implications for the fall harvest?
Martha, you want to comment, or you want me to take a shot at it?
Yeah, well, I was just going to mention, the wet. I think probably, what CPC, the outlooks are, they're calling for increased chance for wetness. It just would depend on how strong and how far north that would extend within the fall. So there's a lot of things at play here. It might be a little bit too early to tell. But for other parts of the region, we could be warmer than normal. So I don't, in my mind, it kind of is dependent on that increased chance for wetness and what percent of this area does it cover. I don't know what you might have to add, Dennis.
The one advantage we have going into this fall is that Martha talked about the quick developing crop this year, that even if we cool down a bit now, the crop is going to mature much earlier than usual. Some of the things I saw is we could have mature corn by early September. So what that does allow is that even if there is some rainfall after that point, the crop will have ample time to dry down and for people to get out and get field work done. So unless things get very wet, where we get an extended wet periods, we have a larger window to be able to harvest. Unlike years where we've had late developing crops where you're leaving it in the field to mature and to dry down, you're getting later in the fall and your window for harvest is getting much smaller.
Okay, we have a question, and I'm not sure if I totally understand it, but I'm going to read the question as posed. Is there any analysis of the spotty/localized storm frequency?
It's an interesting question, and one that I think a lot of people have posed. It is a function of midsummer, that the jet stream activity is slower, so when you get things popping up, they tend not to move as quickly. And we have had ample moisture around to be able to produce rainfalls in areas, because we have seen a lot of that. I don't know, Martha, was there anything else you wanted to throw in there?
No, I don't. I don't really have anything to add. Yeah, I haven't seen a specific analysis of kind of spatial variability of rainfall, but yeah, as you mentioned, it's convective season, and yeah, it's a difficult thing to look at.
Okay, next question. Really, perhaps a comment and then a question. Jerry asks, we have over 19 inches of rain since June 1st. Is this an isolated situation or a new normal? And can we expect more rain events like this in the near future? And Dennis, he directed that one to you. Just teed that one right up.
I know who's asking the question too. That is something that has been noted more frequently and is potentially projected via computer models, is having larger events happening. More, precipitation happening in larger events. So you have maybe larger periods of dryness, and then you have big events after that instead of events distributed around. This is what presents this complication when you're trying to understand precipitation, is sizes of events and timing of events, and trying to understand those two spatial variabilities. That more big events at different times of the year and more isolated events really confuses this situation. The area he's pointing to was that area Martha alluded to in southeastern South Dakota, where he's right. They've had 19 inches of rainfall in a little over a month. Which is a crazy amount of rainfall, and presents a whole bunch of management issues around this time of year. Is it a new normal? I would say increasing variability issues are probably more of our new normal.
Okay, and we have about 5 minutes, and we have one final question from Paul. He asks, has the storage peaked in the Missouri River Reservoir system? And if so, at what level?
Do we happen to have anybody from the Corps on by chance? I know, Brian, earlier you'd mentioned that we didn't have anybody from the Corps. I think we may have peaked on storage. I know they're working on evacuating more of the water from the reservoirs at this point, but I would feel more comfortable with the Corps answering that. So if we don't have anybody from the Corps on, Paul, can you send me a note individually, and we'll get that answer for you from somebody from the Corps.
I do believe I see Kevin is on the line, but I do not.
Can you open up?
But I do not have the ability to unmute him. Oh, maybe I do. Kevin, your line is.
Yes, this is Kevin Thom from the Corps of Engineers. Can you hear me?
Yes. Please go ahead.
Yes, Kevin, go ahead.
Okay, so we have most likely peaked. Our storage, the water in storage has been going down over the last few days. So our peak storage was approximately 68.4 million acre feet. So we had actually used 12.2 million acre feet out of our approximately 16 million acre feet of flood control storage. So we weren't full by any means, but we were at a high level this year. And just one additional piece of information, I think, Dennis, you had mentioned that we do have a lot to evacuate. So I believe our current release is 56,000 cubic feet per second out of Gavin's Point, and we're working our way up towards about a 60,000 cubic foot per second release. And that will be maintained around that level through the end of the fall and probably until about December 1st. So in summary, releasing at a fairly high rate for a long time.
All right. Thank you very much, Kevin. Appreciate it. Any last questions come in, Brian?
No, I saw a thank you to that response. And I also see Matt Moshik from, I believe, from the Corps. And he said that I believe Kevin had it covered. So I chatted him back. Yes. So thank you, Kevin. We have 4 minutes left, and no additional questions.
Okay, Martha, any last additional comments?
I do not. Just I didn't list next month's presenter, Dennis. I don't know if you have that in front of you.
I do not. Might be Brian Fuchs, but I won't commit to that. Yes, the third Thursday of the month, next month, will be August 16th. And I did not double check on who our presenter was, so I apologize for that. But I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about then, with ongoing El Nino issues, and hopefully we have some recovery, but certainly a number of the drought issues are not going to be able to be eliminated. And that's, I guess, a good point to remember too. With the drought outlook, the damage has been done in certain of those areas, so there's really almost no way we can recover some of the issues going on there. So thank you all for coming. Greatly appreciated. I hope you found some use in this, and we welcome to see you next month. Thank you all, and thank you, Martha.
Thank you.